Blessed love and peace in Rastafari. We're going to jump in this quickly, expediently, and perhaps share banter post with. So join us this. For the brethren and sistren who are as yet convinced or insufficiently motivated within the premise. It's hot here. It's warm. The premise of jazz and the djembe. Shares this consideration. Again, the premise of jazz and the djembe, recognizing the sacred sound, the sacred cipher around the jazz and around the djembe. The sacred cipher on the djembe, specifically, particularly involving the Nyabingi rhythms, reggae, Rastafari. Rastafari being the spiritual cipher around the music, amidst the music, with the music. And with jazz, the recognition of the black intelligentsia of the Western Hemisphere, particularly within the United States, around the music of jazz, with and through the music of jazz. And the benefit of intentionally, conscientiously, directly, organizationally, systematically, institutionally, bridging and broaching and building conversation, cooperation amidst our ciphers, I and I. So, for brethren and sistren in the trod of Rastafari, the recognition of the cipher of Rastafari around reggae music, the culture, the spirit of Nyabingi, the teachings of His Majesty Haile Selassie and Her Majesty Waizara Manen. All of this is very, it's given, it's recognized, it's foundation. However, it may be difficult to see the relevance, the congruence, the involvement of the brethren and sistren in the cipher of the black intelligentsia in and around the sound of jazz. So, what occurs recently with I and I is the example from His Majesty himself that he shares within his autobiography, wherein, when he is in exile in England and searching the world for support in his cause, not just his cause, but the cause of Ethiopia, one of the prominent responders, collectives that respond to the call and the cry of Ethiopia and His Majesty during that time, is an organization of kinfolk of African ancestry here in the United States. To be honest, the name of it escapes me even at this moment. The United Organization of African people of African ancestry, people of African descent. So, to be honest, like, it's within the basic pantheon of the black organizations, NAACP, Niagara Movement, the different Christian, African Methodist Episcopal Church, as well as the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, the different Baptist congregations and affiliations, the Nation of Islam, and additionally, amidst all these different institutions, prominent lobbying institutions during that time with the Civil Rights Movement, and further, the leadership, even A. Philip Randolph and Pullman's Porter, and additionally, it's a little bit before that time. That's actually during the time leading and around the time when His Majesty is in exile. Some of those organizations, NAACP doesn't form until a little bit later. So, all that being said, this particular organization, in terms of the studies of history, in general history, in African American quote-unquote studies, this organization is comparatively off the map. This is the first reading it in His Majesty's autobiography. It's the first time I hear about this organization. So, but it's not surprising because there are a lot of organizations that established, a lot of even prominent, influential organizations, low key. And I learned that when I'm in the echelons of the Black intelligentsia a number of decades ago. Like there are a number of initiatives, and additionally, that is like, yo, I never knew like so and so was involved with this and this and that, the other. Like it's a lot of high level, low key, high level stuff. So, anyways, when His Majesty not just references this group, but actually quotes, like includes the actual correspondence that this group sends to the President of the United States at that time. I think it's FDR. Right there, that's an exact example of the Black intelligentsia around jazz that's going on at that very moment. You could say Charlie Parker, definitely Duke Ellington, maybe Cab Calloway. It's a different stage, it's an earlier stage of jazz. It's before the birth of the cool, which occurs about a decade or so later. But that's exactly what we're talking about, because that letter is itself identifies as people of African ancestry and people who are doctors and professionals, and additionally, and call upon the United States, the President of the United States, to act in support and in response favorably to the interests, the well-being, the concerns of the kinfolk of Ethiopia and His Majesty Haile Selassie I. So, and again, it's almost insane. It's almost terrible, to be honest. Terrible how much black folk in this continent rally for the cause of other kinfolk around, particularly African kinfolk around the world. Whether it's His Majesty, and not hating on this, but just recognizing this, just for facts. His Majesty Haile Selassie I, rightfully so. Apartheid in South Africa, rightfully so. Decolonization within the continent of Africa, rightfully so. The different charitable endeavors for different plights and here and there, and additionally, rightfully so. But at the same time, black folk are catching hell here and being killed and genocided here, and yet are still so. Anyway, that's not the point of what I'm sharing at the moment. It's involved, but it's a little bit further in the conversation. The point is right here is just plain and simple. His Majesty himself shows this letter in his own autobiography, providing appreciation for the support. And some people might say, "Oh, these are just no-name whatevers, and what does that mean? I don't even know who these cats is, and what did the United States do anyways?" You don't know how significant that voice is when it's coming from the bottom. So, for those in the tribe who know, this is a reminder and an encouragement to build intentionally, regularly, this cipher, this conjoined, this coalescing cipher of jazz and the djembe. It's much needed because there are many complementary benefits and complementary needs within Rastafari. There's a spiritual literacy and skill set, knowledge, and practice that's very valuable for people of African ancestry of any religion, because every religion is racist and is devaluing kinfolk because of the African ancestry. So there's a need of having a spiritual path, even a congruent path or mystic, a mystic refuge, spiritual refuge of being African, of honoring our ancestors, of learning our language and our heritage, reconnecting with the drum, and additionally. So Rastafari significantly provides this, and Bob Marley, and additionally there's just some of the examples. Burning Spear, who is in town, blessed brethren. So that's the benefits, some of the benefits from Rastafari. But then with the Black intelligentsia, there's a knowledge about how systems and institutions work. There's the knowledge about all the different elements of convention and infrastructure, and additionally, that is necessary for doing these things and all the other things. It's very frustrating to see, brethren, on the very beautiful platforms online, whether it's Rastafari TV, I Never Knew TV. And additionally, those are the ones that I look at. There are many others, I'm sure, but I'm just less aware of that personally. And so, first of all, beautiful works being done, necessary works being done, valuable works being done. So we say big up to the kinfolk who are doing these things. Ballhead in the Dread, Sister Fanai, and additionally, the Rastafari, the Alliance of Rastafari Creatives, and additionally, Brother Kwazi, and further, and respectively, Brother Asamuido, and further. So, big up to all the brethren and sisters who are involved in these endeavors. That being said, what we are frustrated with is that we're just talking about around in circles, and sometimes we get further in terms of, I see the reasoning, I see it recently, but it might have been like a year or so ago, but a reasoning about seed banks, and additionally, yes, that's part of the solution, but it's avoiding and it's shying away from the very fundamental first steps, which is land. What good is the seas if we don't have land? We need land. We have land. We share land. So that's the first thing. So all these other things about talking about business, cooperatives, and seed programs. Habesha is a beautiful example of it, of the actions and practice. And other kinfolk who are doing intentional communities in Ghana. We can talk about Shashamani as well. That's the fundamental thing. And unless brethren are doing that, brethren are talking loud and not saying nothing. That's everybody. And I point out myself all the time. So when I see brethren, esteemed, respected, venerable brethren, talking about the issues, and getting into the finiteness and everything, there's relevance for that, but at the same time, it's not priority. It's relevance, but it's not priority. And when it keeps on talking about that and not talking about the priority, because, all right, I'll get a little bit further on this, but this is part of the notion of Jazz the Djembes is bridging these joints. When brethren have an understanding about conditions and what's healthy and what's unhealthy, there's a lot of lambasting what's unhealthy. Okay, there's some venting with there's some relevance with that. There's some talking about what's healthy and being proactive. I think kinfolk share that, or kinfolk are rather mindful about sharing the healthy solutions, because there's awareness that in sharing the healthy solutions, that's letting go, giving up the goods, and so there's that risk for sharing it with people who don't value it and who don't treasure it, and in sharing it will become tied to the kinfolk who receive that, and if the kinfolk who receive it aren't responsible with that affects the concentration and integrity of our own practice and our own experience of those solutions. So that's why perhaps many kinfolk are very hesitant, or comparatively hesitant, in sharing the positive solutions. That being said, what we also recognize, just plain and simple, the vast majority of kinfolk who are doing these joints, posting, getting lots of views, increasingly prominent, are still extremely attached and dependent upon imperialism, the technology to get this out there, the houses, the domiciles, the mortgages, the rents, the job, the money, the bank accounts. All of that is working against the message. And so it becomes just that subsidized venue for disgruntledness that's still enveloped in the systems of the imperialism. It's very difficult to avoid that, but we can adjust how much our levels are with that and be honest about that, because we are called upon to do that. The systems want us to do that, even though the systems aren't going to tell us that often directly. The systems want us to be that, but we have to take the onus and let go of the things that are less necessary, and concentrate on the things that are increasingly priority. That means doing these joints less and being impersonalist, doing the things that we have further autonomy and independence and jurisdiction of. So I'm uncertain of there being any Rastafari computer companies that are manufacturing mobile phones and computers from scratch, or any entity, to be honest, who's doing it in a organic, ethical, um, um, uh, natural way that attunes and works within the livity. So when that's other than the case, that means that all these things that kinfolk are doing, um, are that are beneficial in terms of sharing message and insight and conversation and reasoning. It's still being significantly and predominantly, arguably, we can reason about that. Um, the preponderance of that is simply just feeding the system. It's feeding the platforms, the online platforms. It's feeding the monetary systems. It's feeding all the other things that kinfolk I and I find disagreeable. So it's a matter of being mindful of that. And then, so because of that and recognizing that, guiding and directing our reasoning and our conversation to this specific priority of living and communicating and cooperating independent from the imperialistic constructs. It doesn't mean absolutely forsaking and abandoning that. For some, it is involved, but the kinfolk are already on that trot anyways. Don't need to be told that. But for those who are in the middle, who have the conscientiousness, but at the same time are also in the experience of conformity, these are the front lines. And so in these front lines, it's beneficial to let go of the fronts. And to be honest about this. And so when kinfolk are compromising, when kinfolk are, I don't want to say selling out, we have to be mindful of how much we vilify people, because on one hand we vilify people, but then we want the things that the people give in doing the things that we are vilifying. But I'm not going to say selling out, but for kinfolk who are compromised, who are enveloped in infrastructure, have a spiritual consciousness, and support liberty, just to be honest about that, and abstain from trying, because a lot of it is just like recruiting kinfolk to be part of that, and again, part of the notion of part of the experience of being within the system and being within imperialism is showing influence and efficacy about other people's behavior, and showing how much one can translate one's actions and words into affecting the behaviors and opinions and ideas of others. So it becomes like a numbers game, and it becomes this, that, and the other, and so they get support for what they share based upon how much the numbers they satisfy to the imperial bosses, the conventional bosses, investors, and otherwise. So, I mean, that's how the game is, but at the same time, there's a greater game, and the imperialist game acquiesces to a greater game. So we have to be on our P's and Q's in living this greater game. And part of that is, again, just being honest. It's not and being honest, not being hateful. It's not being condemning. It's not devaluing. It's just being honest so that we can be further effective within all of our objectives. Because the further objective of imperialism, there is an element of altruism and benevolence, even in that semblance. It has to be effective, because there has to be the buy-in and the motivation of the masses. We talk about, so that's a lot outside of just the notion of jazz and the djembe, but that's part of the discussion, because we observe, to be honest, I observe a stagnancy, both within Rastafari as well as within the black intelligentsia, because there's a stagnancy within the imperialist construct. There's a stagnancy within the proliferation of science and technology. many strands within these experiences are advancing, but at the same time, the masses, the methodologies for governing the masses, um, is in a state of flux. Um, and there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of vying for leverage and influence, and additionally positioning within this flux. And so the constructs that guide, that invest, that subsidize through grants, through investments, and otherwise, those entities, those institutions, those individuals that historically provide these types of monies and materiality to Black intelligentsia and to Rastafari are in states of uncertainty at this moment. And one consideration from another side is that there's somewhat of a side note that brings this back into like the gives it some further kind of perspective or immediacy. But consideration is this: rich people have to give the money away, have to die without, they have to, their lives depend upon giving this stuff away. So the things about charity and everything else, it's not selflessness. It's very much it's not selfish, but it's self-interested. People with much money, the rich and the super rich, have to give money away. How much do I explain why here? Well, the simple playground mathematics is that if somebody has a ball, if somebody has all the toys, they can keep all the toys themselves, and nobody plays with them. They have to share the toys in order to be fun. Now, the kinfolk can like hoard the toys and try to make all the rules and everything else like that, and threaten taking away the toys if they don't play by those rules. But in order to experience like the well-being of a relationship on the playground, that's one rationale. The other rationale is that if one kid has all the toys on the playground, and there's 100 kids looking at those 100 toys, guess what happens? They be like, you know what, huh? We gonna question those rights of property and ownership and inheritance or whatever else. So part of the necessity of the super rich and the rich and the super rich is giving the money. We can say sharing. We can talk about circulating. If you look at just the basic principles of banking and monetary policy, it's a matter of circulation. The money has to keep on moving. If you just stack it up in the bank just doesn't let it sit there. The bank puts it back out there, and then sets policies about who receives it. And that's how the order, the social order, and the societal order is like gets into the hierarchies, the highs and lows of society, is based upon those policies. Because when people receive those debt, the loans, or when people receive those investments, they sign a contract saying, okay, we agree to do this, this, and this. We agree to live this way and this way and this way. Same thing with grants and everything else. So investments, otherwise, jobs, employment, salaries. So people would determine what the terms are when issuing out that stuff, but they still need to issue out that stuff one way or the other. And it might not seem to be so desperate or otherwise, but it very much is. So in that position, the rich and the super rich are basically and simply looking for people who share the same discipline that the rich and the super rich do. That means sharing the same like genuine discipline about not having sex all over the place, being moderate in terms of food and healthy eating and dish. I mean, there's a lot of different disciplines that involve the rich and the super rich. Oh, we got some big old, these are wasps here. They're checking things out. They might get a sniff of the curry. Anyway, so They're not. I mean, obviously, there are a number of different types of disciplines amongst the realms of the rich and the super rich. But the further rich people are, kinfolk are, the further severe the discipline is. And it doesn't mean that anybody they give the money to or their materiality to has to practice exactly the same level, but it has to be compatible. Um, and the thing about that is that, and this is we get into the spiritual, further into the spiritual realm, is recognizing that part of the reason why that is, other than just the common sense compatibility, again, as I described in terms of social order, investing in people who are living in the same way, not just that, it's because the rich and the super rich are still enveloped in competition. They have to fend off the people who are in their own ranks who are trying to overthrow them. They have to fend off their competitors and antagonists and everything else like that. So the rich and the super rich need a crew, need a collective to continue to vie off that competition, and that collective and that crew has to have some compatibility in terms of behavior. So that's again pragmatic need amongst the rich and the super rich, and even further than that, again further into the spiritual awareness of the circumstances. The rich and the super rich are judged by the convictions of the people they give the money to, they give that support to. So what does that mean? Corruption. When kinfolk are high in the echelons of Babylon, and it's just one gets there through hurting others, and so and the propensity to continue in this earthly realm is determined by obviously the Most High ultimately, but there is intermediary. How do I put this? I'm going to wrap this up because I'm getting a little bit out there at the moment. So, but it's a matter of understanding the nature of judgment, and the immediacy of judgment, and how people are subject to the judgment of others. I mean, we can just talk about, obviously, ultimately, God, Allah, Hashem, Tao is the ultimate judge. Brahman is the ultimate judge. Wankantanka is the ultimate judge. That being said, there is earthly judgment, and earthly judgment does have an influence on earthly circumstances. There is heavenly judgment as well, and there's a whole spectrum in that respect. But point is that the further corrupt people are, the further dependent and the further subjugated people are to the judgments of honest judges, not people who are corrupted in just different ways, but to honest judges. And when kinfolk when rich and super rich provide monies and materiality to people who are quote unquote less fortunate, less rich, less materiality, that generally means the people are also less corrupt. And so the people who are rich and super rich are acknowledging a certain and aligning with the comparative, I won't say innocence, but less corruptedness. And in that less corruptedness, there's a power of the mind, the opinion, and the judgment of those. So there is a submission when the rich and super rich provide those monies and materiality. There is a submission that the super rich are doing. The rich and the super rich are doing. There's a submission to the intrinsic judgment, the inherent judgment, not even the inherent judgment from the people that they're giving that to. So let's see if I can try to articulate this simpler, coherent. When somebody is super rich, and gives money to somebody who's less rich, who has less money, the person is less corrupt. That rich or super rich person is essentially acknowledging the value and the benefit, and attaching that rich and super richest person, investing that rich and super richest person's well-being in the works and the plight of that the recipient. And even further, the rich and super rich person is submitting to the authority, the virtuous authority of the recipient. So even when the recipient doesn't know all the dirt and all the corrupted, the heinous atrocities that the rich and super rich person continues on doing afterwards, the judgment, the opinion of the recipient significantly affects the well-being, the life of the rich and the super rich person. So that if the recipient, just hears about somebody being raped, um, and they say, "Oh, that's terrible. They should hang that blah 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 blah," and it's a very severe consequence. Well, that applies to the rich and super rich person, and that rich and super rich person is increasingly um, vulnerable and subjective, intrinsically submitted to that opinion, to that judge of the recipient. So the rich and super rich person does vetting about what the recipient's opinions are, and additionally, so that the rich and super rich person, knowing like how they get their riches and how they keep their riches, how they build their riches, what they have to keep on doing, is that going to be acceptable or somewhat acceptable to the recipient? So again, they vet the ethics, the virtues, and sees how compatible that is with the rich and the super rich. So that can seem like a obviously a rather malevolent kind of malice kind of based motivation, whatever. But it's also very benevolent and altruistic kind of based, because there are many rich and super rich who are the scenario that I shared is basically kind of like the new rich and the quick rich, those who get rich quick in one or two generations and otherwise. There's also the old school rich, and it doesn't necessarily mean better per se, but oftentimes the old school rich, meaning generation after generation, for like it's been in the family or whatever for a long time. That means often, we don't got reinforcements from the wasps. That means that that often means that the initial material, the initial riches, might have been acquired through atrocities, warfare, rape, pillage, murder. However, when we get into the intergenerational experience of families, inheritance and otherwise, generally what is found is that those families practice a certain discipline, livelihood. Again, very austere, very strict. May eat exactly at certain times. May eat specific types of food. Healthy, boring. It's a boring lifestyle. There might be some frills and spills here or there, whatever. But in order to sustain that type of livelihood and influence, and additionally, it's a very strict discipline. And so it's a matter of whoever they find to, and particularly for it to be like, there's in the scenario of it being accumulated, like the wealth or the material wealth accumulating over generations. It means finding an endeavor, a venture that is increasingly relevant, and the discipline amidst that endeavor that is comparatively constant. So when looking for people to invest within, because there's still that need, and looking for people to invest within, it's a matter of finding people who have some proximity with that discipline that the family or that collective has. So, and kinfolk may hate that, and we can talk about all the different types of collectives, whether it's monarchies, whether it's religious communities or otherwise. Through the generations that are accused of these types of is it the word hegemonies or whatever? But anyways, I'm gonna digress from the digression. So double digression means liberty. Anyways, that's the joint. Now, at the moment, I got these red eyes like a yaka fiend. It's warm here. I've been mindful because I've been looking at the screen, and I was outside, so I recognize as I look in the visor what the advising is concerning laying off the stress, both in terms of temperature as well as in screen exposure. So there's that. Trying to figure out like what is the distinguishing factor in determining when it's hot, because when people say, "Oh, it's cold," there's actually a very simple kind of test or standard when talking about coldness, and we can just that term freezing. It's freezing. Oh, it's freezing outside. So first of all, that's an actual, like, that's a specific mathematical assertion, because technically freezing is the point of 0 degree Celsius or centigrade. That's the specific point of the freezing of water molecules. So if it's not snowing, it's not freezing, generally speaking. You got a booger here? Okay. So anyways, oh, that might just be debris from the dinginess at the moment. So anyways, so when we talk about the weather and how we dress, whether we put on a coat or otherwise, like when we say how hot it is or how cold it is. When I say how cold it is, oh, it's freezing. Oh, well, is it snowing? Oh, it's not snowing, so it's not freezing. But is it cold enough to put on a coat? Probably. Okay, yeah. But that's a standard. Now, on the flip side, when we talk about hot, what would be the equivalent in that respect? And it's difficult to find something, because the first thought is boiling, evaporation of water. But that's a little bit too hot for the purposes of pragmatism, because we can still, like, well, actually, what is the point of boiling? Is it 100? I have to look that up. I have to remember about that. I think it's 100. I think it was set, it was designated specifically along those lines. So that might actually be applicable. So, actually, no, because I'm thinking Fahrenheit. So no, that's not applicable. It's not as practical. When it's freezing, we can still live. Like, we can put on some coats and layers and everything else like that, and we can still live in freezing conditions. When it's boiling, and again, I think it's 100 centigrade. I have to look at that up again. But the point of boiling water, to the point where it evaporates, the point of freezing, we can see that. We can evidence that just through our vision, without measurements of like temperature or otherwise. We can see that it's freezing because the water is frozen. So when we say hot, which I think of, like, what's the indicating factor that we can see without measuring temperature or anything else like that, that we can say, yo, it's hot. It seems to be less visible, because, again, the go-to thing would be like seeing water evaporate, like seeing not just water evaporate, but water boiling, and that's saying, okay, yeah, that's hot. But again, that seems a little bit severe. That seems a little bit further out there. Like, that's not practical, because when we're in those conditions, that's not survivable too much. So then we think of another thing, and so the working solution we have at the moment is sitting, shade, sweating. Meaning that if we are sat in the shade and saturated with sweat, or even if we're sweating and we're sitting in the shade, that's an indication of it being hot. And so that evidence is the sweat. That's the liquid evidence of the sweat. Now the thing is, it's not a universal thing, because some cats can sweat when it's low temperature. Some cats can sweat when it's way high temperature. Some cats sweat only when it's like high humidity. So it could be a very moderate temperature but high humidity. So they're all different factors and subjectiveness within the experience of sweating. But at the same time, that seems to be a pragmatic distinguishing characteristic when determining it's hot. Sitting in the shade, sweating. So right now, guess what? Here we are. What else we share? That's pretty much it. So with that being said, we give all thanks and praise to the Most High. Blessed love and peace, Rastafari.